Well, hey there, it's your old pal Keith from wavetables.lol. That's wavetables.lol, where you will find my gigantic, we're talking 140,000 plus, wavetables for modern wavetable synthesizers. And I wanted to talk today about the Bezier curve, because there's this new synthesizer that came out within the last 2 weeks. It's free. It's Zebralette 3 beta version, which I guess is a kind of cut down version of a synth called Zebra, as the creator calls it. And it's very interesting. It's sort of a wavetable synthesizer, but not a wavetable synthesizer in the way that we currently know it. It doesn't import wavetables like the sort that I make, the sort that you could load into Serum or Korg modwave or Vital or Phase Plant or, Pigments, Surge XT, Wave Edit, all these other things. What it does instead is it uses control points to create the wave shapes, or they can also modify spectra, and that sounds different. Watch your ears. It's different. It does morph between frames, and you can see the blue line here in the background as we play. You can see the waveform changing, but it's not interpolating between a sampled single cycle waveform. It is instead morphing the control points and generating the waveform itself. It is interesting, and it does sound good, and it's free, so there's that. But for our intents and purposes, it's not really a wavetable synth. It's something else. It has an oscillator that, and I haven't read the manual, so maybe they talk about it in a different way. But it has an oscillator that I would call a spectral oscillator, right? And so there's multiple ways of interacting with it. It has all these kind of funky effects and such. But this did get me to thinking that I hadn't yet explored waveforms that might be made with a technique like this. This is not, we're not going to do an Adobe Illustrator tutorial. But if you're familiar probably with Bezier curves, try later. You're familiar with Bezier curves if you've ever done any kind of work in Illustrator. A Bezier curve is a curve that's defined by some points, like a start and an end, and then control points that are controlled by these things called a handle. And the size of the handle, let's see if I can grab that other one. The size of the handle and the angle of the handle controls the shape of the curve. And then the position of the curve is controlled by this control point. Okay. And so you can, it is mind-numbing to work with, to be honest. And you might remember a lot of art from the 80s and 90s that, used these vector techniques. Anyway, blah, 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 talky. It occurred to me, of course, a while ago that, anything that we can draw, any waveform that we can draw, something that looks like a function, whether it's from a mathematical function or, it's from a set of points, if we can visualize it as some sort of curve or combination of curves, we can audiolize that by putting it into a wavetable. And so similar to, and take a good listen to this for a second, because we're going to hear more stuff like this. Anything, right, that we can visualize like this, we can audiolize by putting it into a wavetable. And so what I've done is I've added another 3,000 plus wavetables to the KRC Mathwaves collection, which are based on Bezier curves. And we'll talk about how I created them in a minute. And, we'll talk about the sounds. Now, one other thing I guess I wanted to point out here, I called this little test patch of mine, Ain't Nobody Got Time for That. Because while I think Zebralette is interesting, I don't know if this is really the best method of wavetable and waveform creation. it seems very finicky. The other thing is yeah, and I saw this, the creator of it, I think his name is Urs. Am I getting that right? The creator of this was doing a demo introducing beta 3 or sorry, beta of Zebralette 3, and he's just kind of clicking around at random, like in the waveform editor. I'm not sure what add points is. Where you add points. I've lost it already. It's very fiddly, but he was kind of just making these things that sort of look like a triangle wave, on inside of a sort of a sawtooth ramp. And so the thing that occurs to me is what a lot of people are going to do is just create stuff that way. And it's very limiting, actually. There are certain waveforms that you can't create. And as you know, like you saw this maybe in my last video, like this kind of waveform, we sort of know what this is going to sound like, right? This is one of those shark fin style waveforms. They have a certain sound. They're good as like basic oscillators. And I guess a waveform like this, might be useful as an oscillator, but you could never, I don't think, with the set of tools here, create something like the polygonal waveforms that I'm such a fan of. These supernaturally bell-like tones, because the control, the points of the waveform are very, very specific. And it was actually created with an additive process. And there is an additive mode to this, so I'm assuming that you control the harmonics and stuff, but drawing those by hand is madness. That's not the way to get to the exact waveform you want. So I'm not really sure about this synth. I know that a lot of people like the current version of Zebra, which I guess does the same thing. I wasn't familiar with this oscillator at all. But it's interesting, but I ain't got time for this. I'm not, if I'm going to spend time in sound design and in a synthesizer, I don't want to be playing Adobe Illustrator. So anyway, let's jump back into ModWave Native, and we'll take a look at some of the new creations. Okay. Well, okay then. We're back over in ModWave, and this is what, well, it's one variation of what these wavetables sound like made with Bezier curves. That's a song somewhere. Let's go to a simplified patch and just explore some of these Bezier curve wavetables. They sound like this. Very interesting, right? And you might have noticed that there's nothing going on in this particular patch at this particular time with the filter cutoff, and yet they have this kind of resonant and shifting filtering timbre to them. So let's go into edit mode and take a closer look. Let's turn down oscillator 2, and we'll just listen to one oscillator at a time. So the way these are constructed, consider that we have 2048 samples in our single cycle waveforms that make up our wavetable. What I did is I computed control points for Bezier curves at a certain number of segments. And in this particular one, let's see, what are there? Number of points is 4. So there's 4 control points, which makes for 3 segments. And what we do is we randomize the position of the handle, the handle lengths, and the handle angle, and then do the same thing for a second wave, and then interpolate between those and compute the waveform. And they have this really interesting sound to them. Let's flip through a few more of these. Let's just go back to the first one. When you import these into ModWave, you will get a couple new collections. Also in the other styles of waveforms, you'll find them in their own folders. But you'll find KRC Bezier in ModWave. And this is the first set of Bezier waveforms. Let's just go here to waveform 0. Wavetable 0. And you'll hear that they have these little resonances all over because of the curves that are coming and that are coming out in the waveform. And they have a very interesting shape as they go across. Now these are 64 frames, so I computed the start and end waveform and then interpolated all the way through it. And you'll see that you can see the different curve segments and how they change. And a Bezier curve can actually change directions. So sometimes you'll see things like what's going on over here, where whoop, 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 right? And this creates this kind of interesting, it's almost like a complete synthesizer patch. So these are pretty neat. There we are, down an octave, and let's go a little lower. They have that nice little growl as the little resonant sections come in and out. Now, unlike in Zebralette 3, which has an interesting feature where the different wave shapes, the different, I guess, sets of control points, can actually have a different number of nodes. They can have a different number of control points. I was not quite able to work that out. So what happens in these wavetables is that the number of segments in the two start and end waveforms are like always the same. But I would like to work out how to introduce control points. You get this weird phenomenon where a segment will emerge or merge with an existing segment. And it's a little hard to work out the math. And so apparently they solved that, which I think is a neat trick. But these are very close to the kinds of sounds that you would get out of Zebralette. And they're probably more diverse because you probably wouldn't think to make the control points in these kind of ways. I mean, that's part of the benefit of an algorithmic and kind of randomized approach to things. So anyway, if we bring our second oscillator back in, like these things sound really great when they're stacked together, right? And you can get, a lot of different effects. Like this kind of simple patch where there's just these two waveforms later on each other. Again, we're not messing with the filter yet. And I don't think I'm doing any other sort of modulation to them. We're just letting the wavetables do their thing. So if I select some different ones, we can get pretty different sounds. Some other examples. Let's just go through. I made a bunch of patches, just flipping through these things. And these respond really well to things like the stretch parameter. in modwave. You can do other things, like you can do the mirror stretch. Pretty interesting stuff. Here's some different. And so in this one, actually, we're taking advantage of some of the modifiers. So in oscillator 1, we're using the tilt down wavetable modulator, and then the we're using tilt up in oscillator 2, and then we're also taking a page out of the PWM waveform, which I covered a couple videos ago, and I'm modulating the position inside of this wavetable with an LFO to get this little wibble. Bring the other oscillator back in. Nice. All right. And I guess another thing I would mention here, so is it in addition to the KRC Bezier collection, there are two other collections of these. The Bezier collection of the more simple waveforms, they have a more limited number of segments, and the degree to which the handles and the control points can change is more limited. I also made a collection of highs, so you'll find Bezier high in another collection. Let's see here. We'll go to Bezier high. And these have, again, a higher likelihood of varying. So the high doesn't mean high frequency. It means high variation or higher variation than the other set. And so and we're not sweeping this one. Maybe we should sweep him, huh? And we could turn off this position modulation with the LFO. So you see in these, there's a likelihood that there'll be more resonances and more change within the wavetable. There's also an ultra-high collection, which is, again, not ultra-high frequency, but, this one, ultra-high variability, and they have a higher number of segments at a minimum. And so there's slightly, I think I said this, but there's slightly more than 1,000 of the Beziers. There's 1,024 of the Bezier highs and 1,024 of the Bezier ultra high wavetables. So there's a lot to work with. And I find it really interesting how this segment like morphs across the wavetable. It's very interesting. And I have something to say about that, but this video is already pretty long. We'll keep talking for a while. Let's go listen to some of the other sounds that I've cooked up here, again with just a simple patch. Go to play mode so we can see both of those, huh? Way up. Interesting stuff, right? Now, in this one, let's see. I guess we've got different amounts of filter cutoff going on. Where was I? I was here. So, you know, now for a while here, I've been playing patches that have a filter on them. We're just using the 2-pole here, so just to mildly round off the waveforms, but we could put that all the way up. You can hear what that sounds like. So these are great basic synthesis waveforms and wavetables, you know, kind of in the vein of KRC Mathwaves Volume 4 and the Morlet. I guess maybe they're Morlet wavelets, right? Because I'm pretty sure that the Morlet guy is French, and so he's Morlet and not Morlet. But, you know, you say Bezier and I say Bezier, right? So anyway, so, you know, kind of in the vein of the Morlet wavetables that I made, and the shark fin wavetables, etc. So we're, you know, more, you know, good basic synthesis waves. And like I say, they sound great stacked. Let's continue on. I did some monophonic leads here. Let's go to play mode. Who doesn't like a little fingered portamento now and then, right? And what I've done here in this patch is we've got on oscillator 1, we've got one of the Bezier wavetables, right? Doing its resonant filtering thing. And of course, I've got a filter modulation on this one. And then we're bringing in some resonance to enhance the resonance of the wavetable as it is. Now, the other thing that's going on in this particular patch is it's a little quieter, but in OS2, I'm using one of the binary multi... Is it binary multi-ring? BMR. I forget what the BMR is, but some a wavetable from the KRC Mathwaves Volume 1 collection, which is in KRC Mathwaves. These are all part of the same collection. They just have different labels. So it's kind of this formanty. Sinusoidal thing. And mixed really low like this, it just adds a little extra grit. If I take it out, and then bring it back in. Cool, right? So there you go. There's a free little synthesis tip. You can mix waveforms and control their volume to bring in or bring out different characteristics of the sound. Here's another mono lead. What are we doing here? So same concept here. We've got one of the Bezier wavetables, but we are using the mirror morph in modwave on it. And, you know, other wavetable synthesizers have similar kinds of morphs. But what I found kind of interesting about this is that, let's turn off that for a second. That's what the wavetable looks like, you know, naked. And then if we turn on mirror, it starts to look like those Morlet wavetables, right? Where you've got these resonances and it almost looks like a frequency shift, even though the frequency is not shifting here. pretty cool. And again, I've brought in another one of the Mathwaves as kind of backup here, and just to kind of make the timbre a little more gritty. Okay, I think there's one more of these mono leads. Let's go back to play mode so we can see both of them. Okay, so you see some of the same tricks being used here. Yeah, so again, we've got this guy, with the mirror morph on him, and then just to add some more grit, we've got a cubed harmonic series wavetable. This is cubed harmonic series offset 01. Oh, it's turning back up. It's a strange sound, right? But you didn't hear this springy sound in the finished patch. It's just mixed in like this, and it just gives us some really cool grit. Oh boy, fat fingers. And we're a little too low. Okay, cool stuff. There's so many things to talk about, but I'm going on a little long already. I think one thing that people run into with Mathwaves is I think they're not really clear on like what some of the wavetables are for, and like how I integrate them into patches. Because again, it's a collection of wavetables. The focus is not on patches because there's too many damn synthesizers, although I will probably release a collection for modwave pretty soon that takes advantage of the Mathwaves wavetables. I mean, the whole reason I made them is so that I own the rights to them and I could distribute them however I want. But anyway, now we're looking at these Bezier combo patches, and so these are combinations of the Bezier wavetables and some of my other wavetables from KRC Mathwaves. So you can kind of get a serving suggestion for like what you might do with these. So in this one, we're taking one of the, we're taking a waveform from one of these FFT 64 waveform collections that I did a few weeks ago, and just blending them together. So oscillator 2 here is this, this kind of bell-like timbre. There's a lot of bell-like timbres in Mathwaves, I know. And we're modifying it with the Vintage 12 modifier, which gives us a little bit of aliasing for a little bit of retro flavor. Right? And then that's mixed in with one of these Bezier wavetables. And, it's a nice soft one. It's not too bright. And even if I put the cutoff all the way up, right, you can hear what's going on there. Let's look at another one. This is a very fancy patch. Let's go to play mode and we can see what's happening with the wavetables. So here, we're taking advantage of MODwave's AB wavetable mode in both oscillators. And again, I don't think anything I'm showing here so far, no. None of them have more than a single layer. So these are all like 2 oscillator, 1 layer patches so far. So what's going on here in oscillator 1 is we're eventually landing on one of these Bezier high wavetables, right? But we're morphing between 2 wavetables, which is one of the most like cool things and useful things about MODwave. So we're going from one of my, well, it is a Bezier wavetable, but in a different sense. One of my variational autoencoder wavetables. We can hear it. Let's turn this guy down. So this wavetable was generated by AI. So I built these variational autoencoders, trained them on my huge collection of mathematical waveforms, and it learned to produce new novel waveforms. And so what we're doing in this patch is we're like drifting between, morphing between this as a starting place and this as an ending point. And then also over time, we're bringing in a little of this stretch parameter just to give like a little more motion to things. It's a very cool sound, right? And then in layer 2, we're doing something similar. Layer 2, oscillator 2. We're actually morphing between one of the Bezier wavetables and another variational autoencoder wavetable. It looks like this. And it has those very bright, glassy textures that I'm super into, okay? And so we eventually land at the Bezier wavetable, but we start, and you know, we start with the variational autoencoder one, and we kind of move through that glassy area. Cool stuff. So that's one of many ways that you can combine the different waveforms and wavetables in KRC Mathwaves. A couple different combo ideas here. So here we're leveraging, again, one of the VE wavetables, the variational autoencoders. Go watch my video about how I created a bajillion wavetables with AI to learn more about those, morphing it to one of these Bezier high waveforms. And then over in oscillator 2, we've got a KRC random explorer wavetable, which has like 64 different waveforms chosen at random from the collection that I built. And we could greatly change the character of this patch just by morphing the position here. And there is a very tiny, you can see, a very tiny bit of negative position modulation on this. So one cool thing, about my collection of wavetables is that there's many different classes, and you can construct a patch, with like a couple of different types of wavetables, and then you can create like a ton of different variations just by like flipping through different options within the different classes, right? So let's change the Bezier waveform here. Maybe we'll find something bright. That's brighter. And then we could change the starting point here. Oh, that was cool. And then we could change this again, or we could go to another random Explorer one. Ooh, nice. And you can get like just lots of variations. And where did we start? We're just going to lose all our work. We're going to go back here. Coolness. Very similar idea to the last patch, except that here in Oscillator 1, I'm going from one of my Poly Explore wavetables, and these, let's turn off the envelope for a second. These have randomly selected polygonal series waveforms of various types that are they're typically very bell-like. But we're sort of destroying them by using the stretch parameter here. If we turn off stretch, we'll hear the bell-like timbre again. Lots of cool stuff you can do there. I'm getting tired and I'm running out of time. Maybe we'll have to talk about some of the other issues that I want to talk about with the Bezier wavetables. I did create, there's actually for ModWave, there's a second set of them where I've decimated the 64 frame wavetables to only 8 frames so that they're more likely to fit in your ModWave hardware. I realized that the 64 frame wavetables, when you've got 3,000 of them, takes up a lot of space. And so I felt it was probably time that I at least introduce something that had decimated versions. But I wanted to talk about, like, there's a very interesting aliasing that happens there. And it's a new kind of aliasing I've never heard before. But I think you're bored and I'm tired. And we'll talk about that another day. Anyway, all of this good stuff is in KRC Mathwaves. If you already own KRC Mathwaves, you go to my Gumroad page, you go to the Mathwaves product page. You will find this stuff all the way down at the bottom of the list in the KRC Mathwaves Volume 4 collection, where I put the shark waves, all of those basic synthesis waveforms we talked about a little while ago, the Morlet wavetables, and you'll find the Korg MW bundle files for ModWave. You will find WT versions for Surge XT and for Bitwig. And you will find the wave edit versions. And is that all the versions? I think and then the wave versions in Serum format. So there you go. Happy wavetabling. We'll talk more about curves, I think, at another time. Because there's so much to see and do and explore. So great, so great. Okay, night-night.